Yeah. So uh, the search and research question, like I told you, first when there was no knowledge uh, available except in the form of mythologies, people started searching for answers to questions that they had in their mind. And the best examples of those are the Milesian school and the Asiatic school, and to a certain extent, even the Athenian period in Greek history. And I told you that the last phase of Greek history, which is the phase which is actually supposed to be pessimistic because it's full of cynicism, it's full of stoicism, it's full of all these uh, things which are devoid of any great philosophical content. And as a result of that, this period, which is called the Hellenistic period, is seen as the end of the Greek period. Now, if you look at it carefully, what you'll find is that the uh, ancient Greece shines in the Milesian, the Asiatic, and the Athenian times, but it begins to get clouded by philosophies of Stoicism, Cynicism, and even Epicureanism, which, though in terms of its content, is very different from either cynicism or stoicism. It is something that is degenerative culture. So I had told you that Greece ended and you had the beginning of the rise of the Roman period. And initially it was about the ancient Roman Republic. And I told you that it is that which made them translate the work of Plato, which is actually called Politeia, into Latin as res publica, res, res should be not res, sorry, res publica, which got translated into English later on as a republic, but there is no mention of a republic anywhere in the Greek period. What they had was a polis, and they were trying to improve upon the polis so that they could have a better and ethical life. Ethical life, I told you. Uh, the meaning of ethics changed later on once Machiavelli arrives on the scene. But otherwise, ethical life is something that was good life, according to say somebody like Aristotle. Good meaning leading a life based in ethics, doing good to yourself, doing good for others. And it also meant that it was a question of community good, or the good of all, or a collective good. So he famously ended up saying, what is good for the individual what is good for the police is good for the individual. The police, of course, being the pivotal institution that had both the political and the social uh, dimensions to it. Now, when the Greek civilization weakened and the Roman civilization came up, you will see that you have the missing of the name polis. So, frankly speaking, the Latin scholars didn't know how to deal with it. And they dealt with it in the best possible manner as far as they were concerned, which was about uh, dealing with what should I say? It was about dealing with their own republic. And they dipped into Greek philosophy because of the ethical content that Greek philosophy had. And this ethical content is what gave birth to early Roman philosophy. So, otherwise, a lot of, if you read writers like Juvenal, 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 and all of these people who were, you know, very influential at one stage. Their writings were full of sexual orgies and things like that, which essentially meant that there was no, what should we say, there was no ethical content in it, and that is when uh, people tried to create a philosophical idea in Rome itself, and they based it in the ethical content, sorry, that one will find uh, in the Greek philosophers, uh, and especially the Athenian philosophers, both Plato and Aristotle. Now you see, as the transmigration happened to Rome, then they replaced the polis with the republic or res publica. And so, what is this res publica? I had been through it. I'm going to go through very, very quickly. The res publica is the ancient Roman republic, something like the equivalent of people in India having their Janapadas, especially the Janapadas, and to a certain extent, people say that Ganapadas are same, but Janapadas and Ganapadas may not really be the same, is one of the perceptions that you will come across. And I would tend to agree with the latter rather than with the former idea that Janapadas and Ganapadas were both same. In the Janapadas, you had the first panchayat and the idea of a panchayat samiti, which you don't have find in the Ganapadas. Ganapadas was more about Shiva and his followers. The Ganas were Shiva's followers. And as Shiva came down from Tibet into the mainland, heartland of India, he was followed by his Ganas. And wherever possible, they had conquered territories and set up Garnapadas with Shiva as the leader, basically. Now, I don't want to get into the rest of it because it is very difficult to extract the lore from what was real. Like, for example, Nandi was compared, I mean, technically speaking, people say Nandi was the bull on which Shiva went around riding. But there are other interpretations that Nandi was somebody who was heavy like a bull. And so the name Nandi became coterminous with, uh, it became coterminous with that of the bull that uh, we find in the usual writings. Okay, but like I said, I'm not going to go there. But the Ganapadas were certainly not republics because a republic is where the people have a tendency to rule themselves, and the Janapadas are most definitely uh, things which are what should we say? They are republics because there is an elected sarpanch, and there are four other punches uh, who are selected by parties in dispute. If you want to know more about it, please read Premchand's Hindi novel Panch Parmeshwar. Though it's not set in the ancient republic, it is set very much in the modern republic. Uh, Premchand wrote this as a support to Gandhi's idea of uh, making India a panchayat system after we attain independence. So it's an extremely wonderful Hindi novel, which if you can read in Hindi, it's amazing. Otherwise, you'll find translations of it in English. Uh, you can read it in those as well. But Hindi, if you know the language, please stick to Hindi. And sorry. Uh, so the Roman Republic was like something like the uh, republic that is portrayed in the Panch Parameshwar. And the Roman Republic at one time was a triumvirate. Uh, Triumvirate meaning that it had three heads or three different what should I say institutions of governance. We don't have government yet. So what are these three? One is the leader who is somehow elected by the people. One doesn't actually know the procedures that were employed. But by people, we don't mean like an election that we have today. It was elected, he was elected by the senators, the second house, the second of the two houses in the triumvirate. The Senate consisted of citizens who were extremely uh, important people in the Roman scheme of things. And it was these people who brought some kind of semblance of order uh, to the Roman society. So you have, on the one hand, senators who elected somebody like a leader. Caesar was not the name, by the way. I had told you that Julius Caesar is the name of a person. Caesar is not a title, it is his name. Because he converted the triumvirate into a monopoly, uh, people who came after him, like Augustus and all those, they also started using the name Caesar to denote that they were very powerful. But otherwise, Caesar was the full name of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar. Okay. Augustus was not Augustus. He was, I think, Constantine, if I'm not mistaken. He became Augustus Caesar. And so the tradition of, no, not Mark Antony, I think, was the one who became Augustus Caesar, not Constantine, actually. So if you look at all these things, then what is evident to us is the fact that there was a transformation in the Roman Empire also. Now, the third house, because I can't find a, or it should be, maybe if you use a Latin derived word, it will be more like a chamber, uh, Cambrium, and that'll be uh, the magistrates. The magistrates were judges who were capable of uh, understanding and weeding out the good from the bad. And so these people, since they had been uh, educated, not necessarily formally, in some kind of jurisprudence as to what is a crime, what kind of a crime would constitute a law, would constitute this thing for punishment by law. And how do you create these laws which could be both for punishment and for reward? So you see, at one time, if you look at the Roman history, the whole of Roman history is replete with writings of people like Cicero, Seneca, even Virgil, though he's known for his drama and uh, for semantics. I'm not a big fan of Virgil, and if you have stupid languages in Europe today, a part of the portion of the blame should go to Virgil. So, and when I say how stupid the European languages are, uh, like, you write one thing and read it as something else. Okay. I always forget the name of that volcano that erupted a few years ago in Iceland. It was unpronounceable, that particular name. I don't think nobody can actually recall it out of memory because of its. The Icelanders probably can, but not the rest of the world. Horrible pronunciation here. Even if you look at places in the United States of America, you have something which is written Tucson, but people read it Tucson, which is a French influence. And so you see this lousiness that you find in terms of the phonology or the phonetics, which is the study of sound. Uh, you see that, the way spellings are uh, uh, in European languages and way they are pronounced is something completely different. Like Italian, if you take, for example, sometimes you pronounce C as ch. Okay, so there was this Formula One driver whose name was Andrea the Cesaris. Okay, Cesaris is the spelling of Caesar with an IS at the end, but pronounced Cesaris. And sometimes you find a single C being pronounced as K, Luca, will be Luca. But sometimes you have CC being produced as Chi, and sometimes you have CCH being pronounced as Ki. So if you can pronounce a single C as Ki or Ka, why do you need this complex pronunciation? Then that is because of the extremely poor phonological basis. And you look at uh, this thing of European languages. And if you compare them with other languages, especially Indian languages, there's only one way you can read a word unless you're not properly educated. Okay, how you write is how you read, and how you speak is how you write. So you don't have, like, for example, you take the name Godavari. Godavari in any of the languages is written only as Godavari. That's it. So There are four letters in that particular name. But if you write it in English, you can read it as Godavar, right? You can read it as Godavari, you can read it as Godavari. And so emphasis, punctuation, where does what lie, is something which is extremely weak in Latin and Latin derived languages. All right, so that is because of the fact that you have separate alphabet, letters of the alphabet, uh, producing separate sounds, but when you string them together, there's no protocol as to why we have to pronounce them in a particular fashion. Like Monaco, the pronunciation of the Europeans is Monaco. We get biscuits by that name in India, and we read that as uh, uh, Monaco. Okay, similarly, the Panama, it's a country and it's also a lake like this. It's not like the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal. It's far, far more complicated, and sometimes ships have to be put on stilts and taken out. So there is a limit to what size of ships can go through the Panama Canal. And so the big bulk tankers cannot go through the Panama Canal. But here we are calling it Panama. In India, at one time, a cigarette was sold, which had the same name. And the name was pronounced always as Panama. It was never pronounced as Panama. We used to pronounce it as Panama. Even when it comes to the country, it is pronounced as Panama. So you see the disadvantages with the Latin-based languages. I'm emphasizing so much upon this because language is the root of all philosophy and the root of all expression. Okay, there have been different theories of language. Some people saying that what is language? Can we think without language? Can we express ourselves without language? That is, yes, it is possible. We can do through another form of language, which is semiotics, science. Those are all language science. So that is semiotics. The other is semantics. What does certain thing mean? So, for example, if you are writing George in English, uh, what does it become in French? It becomes, I don't know what it becomes. Some people say it becomes Georges, but pronounced George. So I seriously don't know what is the French pronunciation of George. Uh, but if you go to the Slavic side, towards Hungary, George is pronounced Georg, Georg, Georg. That's how it is pronounced. Now, in Italian, the confusion is even more when we are looking at these things. In Italian, Gianni, is that George, or Giovanni, is that George? One of them is John. I think Gainni, Gianni, that is John, the equivalent of John. And the equivalent of uh, Giovanni is I mean, sorry, Gianni is the equivalent of John, and Giovanni is the equivalent of George. That is what people tell us, but Italians disagree. They say we have just these names. Why do you want to find anglicizations of it? But people are doing it all the time. Uh, Jacques, which is a word in French, is pronounced Jack in English. And Jack is actually an endearment of the term John, okay, which it is not the case in uh, French, as is evident from the name of the great philosopher, Jean Jacques Rousseau. So that is John Jack Rousseau. All right. So what I'm trying to tell you, therefore, is that the problem of uh, pronouncing words, emitting sounds, is a universal problem with all Latin derived languages. Okay, perhaps the least problematic of all these is uh, Italian, to a certain extent, a very limited extent, Spanish. Uh, though one lady whom I had met uh, kept insisting that we write as we pronounce. So I said, please pronounce Jorge for me. And she said, Jorge, Jorge. So I said, what is that? Jorge is John, but George. But how is it that J and G are both being pronounced as H and H? Okay, so no, you don't speak French as you write. If you write a double L, it is ya. Okay, Mallorca is Mallorca. It's not Mallorca, it's Mallorca. And E towards the end is cut like German into a. So if you have a name like Krivil, or spelling like Criville, Krivil would be what how other people would pronounce it. But the Spanish pronunciation of that is Crivilla, Crivilla. Now, the year part double L is shared by French and Spanish, but the French, like for example, unless it is guillotine, because there's a substantial sound after Golli, which we say guillotine. Technically, it is guillotine. And if you look at other things, such as uh, Bastille, uh, which is a prison, Bastille, but you don't pronounce that as Bastilla. You just pronounce that as Bastille, and you don't pronounce, for example, uh, the palace of what will be in English. If we just read it in English, we'll say Versailles. But uh, the thing is that you must understand that it's not pronounced Versailles, whatever after the LL, because Versailles, LLAIS or something it is. but you simply pronounce that as Versailles. Versailles. Okay. What comes after the ya is the I. Versailles is how you pronounce it. So you see, these have, if you think I'm wasting your time, I'm not. I'm trying to tell you how confusing philosophical investigations in the English language are, or any of the native uh, languages of Europe are, because of the fact that they have very, very poor phonology. Similar sounding words sometimes have the same meaning. Two different sounding words sometimes uh, uh, have two different meanings, but sometimes they have the same meaning. So sometimes similarly written words have different pronunciations. So you see, none of the European languages, for all great claims they make about themselves, they are they can actually be categorized as not so evolved languages at all, because you don't find any kind of evolution in them. It only seems as if they are, uh, you know, because of their colonial influence at one time, especially Spanish and Italian, and not Italian, sorry, English, and to a certain extent, the French and the Germans also. You see, again, Spanish, German, the E is never pronounced A or E, okay? Porsche, Porsche, is pronounced Porsche in German. It's not pronounced Porsche, nor is it pronounced what the Americans do, which is simply call it Porsche. Okay. Some people pronounce it as Porsche, which is again not the correct pronunciation. Okay, and similarly, you can pick up a number of words which have multiple pronunciations, and you don't know which is, and quite a few of the native speakers do not know why there is this kind of difference in pronouncing words with similar spelling. Okay, and so anyway, if we continue to look at if we continue to look at these words, they demonstrate to us the great difficulty that we have sometimes in understanding the languages that are there in uh, Europe. Okay, languages that are there for understanding. The European languages aren't the most convenient. And that is the reason why people would say that Sanskrit is not only known for its clarity and for its syntax, semantics, and semiotics, but it is also known for its brevity. English is one language which uses 10 words where probably 5 would suffice. In Sanskrit, where you might have to use 10 or 8 English letters to build a word or to build even a sentence with words, there 3 or 4 would be sufficient in Sanskrit. So Sanskrit is the most evolved language, whether you like it or not. And I'm not here talking to you as a RSS BJP person, but Sanskrit is most definitely the evolved language. And it was deliberately kept without a script because the only way of transmission, of knowledge in ancient India was through the medium of speech. So you'll say some knowledge is translated by the spoken word. And so the purity of Sanskrit was maintained till such time that it basically got uh, a script in the form of the Devanagari script, which is used for Hindi around the 11th, 12th centuries CE or AD. Okay, it is then that all kinds of interpolations began in the, if you look at Rig Veda, the Rig Veda doesn't have any Varna system built into it. There is no Varna system in it. Varna system came into the Rig Veda because of the fact that there was once it was written, people could interpolate an entirely new text into it. And that text is the Purusha Sukta. So people will tell you the Purusha Sukta was always a part of the Rig Veda, which it wasn't. Purusha Sukta is the one that introduced the Varna system, and that is around the 11th or 12th centuries CE. Before that, there's no description of any kind of Varna, either in the Rig Veda or in the Yajur Veda or in any of the Vedas. And so you see the sanctity. By that, I don't mean it as something sacred. What I mean is the sanctity of a language and its grammar was respected as long as it was knowledge transmitted orally. Oral transmission of knowledge basically ensured that there would be no problems. But that is not how it has happened with uh, Latin languages, and Latin derived languages, and for that matter, even Greece. Now, when you come to talk about ancient Greece, the Greeks did not make a distinction between science and philosophy. Okay, philosophy is something that came from the understanding of the universe, which is philos. Science is the same thing. So you could replace one word with the other, and that would make absolutely no change whatsoever to the meaning what was being conveyed in the Greek languages. Okay, it's only later on when people started bickering about things, and I'll be coming to that tomorrow. They started bickering about what is science and what is philosophy. It is then that these dichotomies, which are so famous for us, and those dichotomies with which we are so familiar, these dichotomies start playing up, and that too, most of these are in the uh, modern period, which calls itself the scientific period, as if there was no science before that. Okay, and in the condescension that the English the people showed towards Indian Shastras, they put them all under the category of alchemy, not under the category of science. Alchemy is, something which is in the nature of a probable or a possible, not probable, a possible science which never uh, was the case. It didn't turn out into a possible uh, uh, into a possible science. And one example that I can give you is astrology. Okay, and when we talk about astrology, um, people say, look at the predictions being made by astrologers. Hey, shut up, shut up. The prediction that is being made here is that, uh, you know, uh, not a prediction, the contention that is being made here is so many predictions are made and which don't come true. Now, so let me ask you, meteorology, is it alchemy? Will you consider it to be alchemy? Meteorology also makes predictions. It'll say next 3 days it'll rain and you'll have a hot sun. And it says when you're going to have a hot sun, it might be a hot sun or it could rain. 1 second, please. Uh, so, is meteorology alchemy then? Let's talk medicine. Is medicine a science? Allopathy is not really its name. It is a name that has been given to it, but otherwise it's simply called medicine. Okay, whereas Ayurveda is the Indian form of medicine, Unani is the Iranian, Arabian kind of medicine. But medicine is medicine, so somebody decided that you got to give it a name, because especially when you have a homeopathy, which is also a Western derivative, uh, it is something that has come uh, from Germany. So homeopathy is actually not homeopathy, as we say. It's HOMOE, homeopathy. And homeopathy is something that no one knows today also as to why it works on some people and it doesn't work on other people at all. And everything is sent to the mind, and people say if you don't have a belief in a system of medicine, then it is automatic that the system doesn't work. By the same principle, allopathy shouldn't work if you don't believe in it. But people will not agree to it. I have seen quite a few people say, no, no allopathy for me, please. It causes all kinds of problems. Okay, and the treatments of cancer, for instance, chemotherapy or radiation therapy, they are not treatments at all, because they are not only destroying the unhealthy cells that have turned cancerous. Uh, these cells are usually white blood corpuscles. And if you are going to basically look at uh, things where you say, uh, we'll do chemotherapy. Chemotherapy kills not just the unhealthy cancerous cells, usually white blood cells. It also kills the healthier ones. It also kills the healthy cells. So your body immunity comes down after each round of uh, chemotherapy. So if you sit for chemotherapy and at the beginning you take a count of how many white blood corpuscles there are, you'll probably find an exaggerated amount, like 50,000 or something. That is indicative of the body turning against itself, an autoimmune kind of. disaster. And the moment you do chemotherapy, the number of white blood cells 2 days later will come down to 500. 500 will be as low as that, which means you're opening the person to all kinds of attacks. You're opening the person to all kinds of attacks from any kind of infection. How does your body defend itself with 500 blood cells or white blood corpuscles? Okay, so you see, why does this happen? What are these autoimmune diseases? Why does the body, SLE, for example, systemic lupus erythematosus, why does it, why does your body turn against itself? Why? No answer for that question. The only thing that you have is your body has turned against itself. So these autoimmune disasters that happen to us are not predictable. Angelina Jolie practically got all her organs removed. I think she just has a skeleton with a heart and lungs in it now, nothing else. Why? Because her mother and her mother's sister, or the two of them, had cancer. So she went and got every organ which can possibly be riddled with cancer. She got them all removed. Let's say, let's save her. If not cancer, some other thing will get to her anyway. So the mind structure is also different when it comes to allopathy, because it seems like we think there is a solution to everything that happens to us. And whereas allopathy actually doesn't have, it'll tell you have three blocks in your arteries around the heart. So you're prone to have a heart attack. So let's remove the blocks, or two blocks, because three will require surgery. Two can be removed with what do you say? It can be removed with stents. Two blocks can be removed by putting two stents. Now, but if you are a cigarette smoker, the first thing they'll ask you is, do you smoke cigarettes? And you say, yes, I smoke cigarettes. And they say, yeah, that's the reason why this has happened. Then you say, they ask you, do you smoke cigarettes? And you say, no, I've never smoked even one. Then they'll say, do you eat red meat? Say, no, I'm a vegetarian. I do not eat red meat. Okay. And then they'll ask you if you have the habit of chewing tobacco. Say, no, I don't do anything like that. Areca nuts. Do you chew areca nuts? No, I don't chew areca nuts. Why do I have heart disease then? God is great. We never know why, who gets. And there are people that I personally know who have smoked and lived till the age of 96. They were smoking till they died. I mean, that doesn't mean literally till they died. Uh, they didn't give up smoking ever. They were smoked. All right. And then can you explain how they lived till 96? If smoking is a hazard that can kill you. Similarly, with liver, there's a condition called fatty liver. They'll ask you, do you have alcohol regularly? You say, no, I'm a non alcoholic. If you say I'm an alcoholic, yeah, that's why you have. I'm not an alcoholic. I do have alcohol, if you say. That itself will become a cause for them to say that's the reason why you have a fatty liver. But if, say, I'm not an alcohol drinker at all, even on an alcoholic, then why do I have a fatty liver? Then they'll say, it must be the food that you eat. Uh, do you eat a lot of animal fat, which is key? And if you say, no, I don't, then they'll say, do you eat a lot of oily food? Now, come on, you have to eat food, right? What is lot of oily food? If you say any yes to any of these, then that is the reason why you have a fatty liver. But if you say no to all of them, if you say absolutely no to all of them, then they'll say again, we don't know. God functions in strange ways. These are not sentences I have spoken. I have lost a cousin at the age of, he had his first heart attack when he was 37. And he somehow survived for a few more years. But before he hit 50, he had two more heart attacks and he finally passed away. Never smoked, never ate pickle, never had ghee, all those things. Now, look at Ayurveda. Ayurveda will give you every medicine with ghee because it is proven, even through allopathy, that there is a thing called blood-brain barrier, which means that if you are given 100 milligram tablet, then that particular tablet will, the 100 milligrams are not absorbed by the brain. 10 milligrams at most of the 100 are absorbed by the brain. The rest are thrown out of the body. Now, Ayurveda says ghee is the only substance that can break the blood-brain barrier. And if you take a medicine with ghee, 100 mg equivalent medicine of Ayurveda with ghee, then 70% of that is absorbed in the brain. That is how ghee works. Ghee does not cause, now finally they have done enough tests and they have found that it does not cause blocks in the heart or in the arteries around the heart. So it knows the whys. Why am I having this? Because you have a heart problem. But uh, how did I get this heart problem? What did I do to get it? We don't know. So sometimes it answers the hows and sometimes it answers the whys. But never does it answer both the hows and the whys together. Why is it that person who smoked and smoked till he was 96, why, how could he live? Whereas somebody who never smoked a cigarette died at 46. So how do you explain that? In which way do you explain that? There is no explanation. Yet we believe that this is a science. It is not a science. You will say Ayurveda is alchemy. You will say tribal medicine is alchemy. You will say everything is alchemy. But you will never say that allopathy is also alchemy. Okay? And allopathy does not look at the body holistically. Doctor puts his stethoscope around your lungs, finds that they are filled with some kind of uh, immediately comes to the conclusion that you have a chest infection. And these days, earlier on, they had to decide whether they'll use penicillin or tetracycline Doctors had to decide, no, you don't have to do that. You have broad spectrum antibiotics, which will work for anything from a bad throat to a bad stomach. Everything they work. Okay. So broad spectrum antibiotics. What are you doing? You're doing what chemotherapy does, killing even the uh, healthy cells. And that is why when you are taking very powerful antibiotics, you have tend to have diarrhea. Because in the gut region, it kills the harmful cells and it also kills the healthy cells. So, what is the treatment now? You give uh, an antibiotic, and along with it, you also give a probiotic, which is supposed to be nothing but healthy bacteria, which are there in a frozen condition or something. And when you take that, then it counters the effect of one and the other. So it's like that. So how scientific is this? How scientific is this? And if I start talking to you about mental illnesses, then the more you talk about it, the less probable it looks like a science. So I'm not going to talk about those. Since Sharad came a little late, I'll take 3 more minutes to finish off. Uh, so, what I've been saying all these days is that we have tended to very clearly bifurcate philosophy and theory on one side and so called science and scientific methodology on the other side. Okay, so to continue with the example of allopathy, they always want to look inside you, whether it is through an ultrasound or through an MRI or through a CT scan, any of these things. And if that is not possible, then we will send probes down into your body. We'll see how many blocks are there in how many these things. So you have an angiogram. And if it has to be done for the brain, it's called a carotid angiogram because they send it from up here into the brain. Uh, so you see, this is again probing essentially. You're not treating anything. You're probing, and what you find through the probe may or may not be the reason why you're unwell. A lot of people carry a lot of complex problems and they live a comfortable life without even knowing that they have some problem. My father was one such case. And then they decided to do, the gastroenterologist just wanted to see how things are. He wanted to uh, do an endoscopy. He did an endoscopy and told my dad, "You have a hiatus hernia," of which my father was never aware. So my father said, "When would I have had it?" He says, "I don't know." Now you have a hiatus hernia. What is the treatment for it? Surgery. You have to push the uh, stomach down so that it doesn't come jutting up into the uh, diaphragm. So you push it down surgically. And then what happens? Is there some place you stitch it up? No, we just push it down and leave it. And it can always come back up again. So you see, there are no final treatments. There are no, so that is the reason why we have never been able to conquer death. We've never been able to understand the whole world, the cosmos, or is it a chaos? We have never been able to understand that because of the poor poverty of the so called science in which we place so much trust. Okay, somebody ought to write a book, maybe I will. the poverty of science. Nowadays, everybody thinks data will give you the answers. Big data. What big data? It only leads to hyperfactualism. You don't know what to do with contradictory facts, so you throw both of them aside. So you see that when we look at the whole idea of research methodology, first and foremost, it was theory. And theory is or philosophy, if you like. It is not something that is arbitrary. Theory has its own methodological ways of exploring things. And methodology has its own limitations, has its own limitations. So, what is this empirical studies that you're doing? You come to me and ask me, do you like the BJP party? I might be somebody who loves the BJP. I may be a huge Modi bhakt, but I don't want everybody to know that. No, I'm not. Okay. So the CSDS in Delhi conducted so many pre-poll surveys, came up with results, cephology. It's a complete pseudoscience. They came up with results and said this is how the patterns will be. Even before the exit polls were banned, they were doing this. And so every time, and wonderful, uh, our wonderful department has the dubious distinction of having done some 8 election studies and coming up with every possible wrong conclusion. By sheer chance, also, our department never produced uh, anything which was even close to uh, which was even close to this uh, in terms of reality. So you see, let us, when we enter the scape called the research methodology scape, I want you to, that is what we're going to do tomorrow. I want you to remember 2 principles. One principle that you have to remember is methodology, or not methodology, let's start with research. Research does not preclude the possibility of a search. Some people are researching while others are searching. Okay, so there could be 2 simultaneous activities. Second thing, methodology. Methodology is not exclusive only to science, scientific method, you say. Anything that you do methodically is a methodology. So if you want to build up house with those fixo bricks or anything, there is a method to it. You build a house by putting pieces that are compatible with each other, and you build that small little house. So does that mean that you're being extremely scientific? No. You're only taking pieces that are compatible with each other in building a structure that is identifiable. That doesn't become a science. So methodology has its own limitations. Theory has its own methodology. Methodology has its own theory. And suddenly somebody woke up in the 20th century, towards the later part of the 20th century, and said, yeah, we can actually have empirical theory, which is methodological theory. It's an apology for saying methodological theory. Okay, so thank you. Tomorrow we dive straight into methodology. Then We'll come back to make a link with research. Okay, thank you very much. Uh, all right.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
All right then. Thank you. See you at 6:30 tomorrow. Yes, Sharath.
Sir, good evening to you. I was a little late because I was stuck in traffic from early to.
Sharath, I understand that you people have lives of your own and that this is not the ideal way to teach. But there's no other way I can bring all of you together on one platform. I can't bring all of you on one platform and say, let's have offline classes somewhere. That's not going to be possible. So,
Sir,
it, yeah,
I just wanted to ask you, and I just wanted to clear. I don't understand the term ontology. I have read
ontology.
on. Yes, sir. I can understand epistemology. I've read epistemology here and there, but ontology, regardless of where I read it, is a word that I am unable to understand. And
You read ontology in Heidegger.
no, no.
Heidegger. Please read Being and Time, okay?
Okay.
Which is a German work that Heidegger wrote. This is the translation of that. Uh, the thing of this is that we say Sein and Zeit, Sein und Zeit, which is the name of the book in German, has been translated uh, into English. If you read this book, you'll begin to get a sense of what ontology is. But since you raised the question, I'm not going to say go read that book. I will give you a brief answer. The brief answer is if you look at somebody and ask, you can also read John Macquarie's book called Existentialism, in which he discusses ontology and epistemology. If you want a one line definition, epistemology is the pursuit of knowledge. Ontology is the pursuit of being with a capital B, which is our existence. That's why it's existentialism. Okay. Now, epistemology does not rule out questions of the ontological variety. And ontology does not rule out epistemology. After all, the only difference is that in epistemology, you're pursuing knowledge for the sake of knowledge. In ontology, you are pursuing knowledge for the sake of understanding who you are and why do you have to go through this life with all its miseries, with all its problems and everything put together. Why do we have to go through this life together? So if you read Being and Time, you'll see Heidegger talks about our birth as being thrown into the world. Okay, we've been thrown into the world. We don't know why we have been thrown here. What is this world? And to make things more complex, he would say that, you know, you are thrown into a world which is like a jungle. There is a thick canopy of trees and branches on top of you. On the ground, you can't see anything because there are trees, trees, and trees. So, how do you know where you are? How do you know what you are there for? So, he says ontology is that which begins by trying to find a clearance in this jungle, in this forest. Okay, if you go there, you find an open space from where you can look up and see the sky, look down and see the earth. You can do those things. And that is how ontology is. You try to make sense of your existence first. So, all knowledge is not for the sake of having knowledge. Knowledge is for the sake of making sense of your existence. So, that is how you would briefly describe uh, ontology, very briefly. Okay. Now, if you go into Heidegger, Heidegger also talks about not just ontology, he talks about what he calls ontico ontology. And what is ontico ontology? For that, you'll have to know what Kant is and what Kant says about two kinds of worlds. One world being the noumenal world, which you can't see, and the other being the phenomenal world. Because one difficulty that Heidegger had to confront was people said, okay, I know why you're saying this is phenomenology. And you're saying that there is no difference between the essence and the appearance, which is what traditional epistemology tries to do. That every appearance has an essence. Okay. But Heidegger says every appearance is the essence. We'll talk about this in detail later. I'm not going to put this away. It's one of the most important things that we need to know as students of social science. All of us need to know this. But I'm just giving you a primer of sorts. And so, if you look at existentialism, there is German existentialism, there is French existentialism. You might have heard of Simone de Beauvoir being described as a feminist. But frankly speaking, Simone de Beauvoir, more than being a feminist, is an existentialist who was under the influence of uh, Jean Paul Sartre. Jean Paul Sartre was somebody who was a French existentialist. He wrote a theoretical work called Being and Nothingness, okay, which is an attack on Hegel. Because for Hegel, everything in life has a purpose. Your being has a purpose. Whereas Sartre says there is no such purpose. So when he found that people were finding it very, very difficult to understand his uh, text Being in Time, he also started writing stories. There is a trilogy. Please forgive me, I have forgotten the name of the second novel in the trilogy. The first novel is called The Age of Reason, and the third novel is called The Iron in the Soul. But I can't remember what the second this thing is at this moment. Uh, Now, in this trilogy, it's not important to read all the three books. It's important if you read The Age of Reason. Uh, what is the Age of Reason? When we talk about the Age of Reason, we talk about it as a Renaissance, we talk about it as a Reformation. But Sartre is not talking about it like that, which is the opposite of epistemology, what Sartre is doing. Sartre is basically trying to say he's created a character called Matthew Delarue, who unfortunately impregnates a woman who's not married to him. Now, he's caught in morals. He's caught in morals in the sense, what do I do now that I'm instrumental? I'm the reason why this thing has happened to this woman. What is it that I should do to basically uh, to find out if I can have a termination of the pregnancy. And in those days, Orthodox days, no proper doctor did termination of pregnancies because it goes against Christian ethics. So they go to uh, some kind of a midwife who says she can terminate the pregnancy. But in the end, he realizes that all that is wrong, because who created this moral system who said you cannot terminate the existence, a pregnancy? Who created it? God? Who's God? How do I feel God? How do I know there's a God? So that, according to Sartre, is the dawn of the age of reason on Matthew Delarue, when he finds the vacuousness of morality, ethics, okay, since they are post uh, Kant, the thing is that Kant is trying to basically say that morals are a categorical imperative. So Sartre is attacking that by saying, how is it a categorical imperative? And Heidegger is attacking uh, Kant when people said, okay, you're talking about ontology, which is about the phenomenon. What you mean to say that there is no world beyond the phenomenal world? There's no world up in the sky? Things that we cannot see properly, and if I'm sitting in this room, do I assume that on the other side of the room there's nothing? There may be something. So he said you can even existentially study the noumenal world, which is ontic. So you have the creation of this phrase, ontico-ontology. You have the creation of this phrase. Ontico-ontology is addressing itself to the Kantian thing of the noumenal and the phenomenal world, that is German existentialism. French existentialism of the Sartrean variety is basically trying to say, prove where this morality comes from. Who has told you that this is moral? Why is it a categorical imperative? Okay. So the person who started this basic debate of the visible world and the invisible was Machiavelli. And Machiavelli rejects all kinds of ethics, all kinds of morals. So we'll do that when we start talking about Machiavelli, about whom we shall start quite soon, maybe in a day or two. Tomorrow we'll start with the resolutive compositive method of research, and that is considered to be the most nascent and primary form of scientific methods. It is from there that everything emerged, and it is a critique of Christianity. Okay, so from there on, you have this tussle between critique of Christianity and uh, critiques of science by Christianity, and what was called biblical hermeneutics ultimately gives way to social science hermeneutics, which I told you the Germans pronounce hermeneutics, but we are not in any way compelled to pronounce. We are not German. We can pronounce it as hermeneutics. So we'll go through all these as quickly as possible. But you have to know these things. And at the end of this, I'd also try to tell you how to organize some material for your thesis writing and all that kind of stuff. So thank you very much. I've kept you late despite my promise that I'll end on time. I have shot up almost by half an hour. My apologies to all of you. And I'll see you tomorrow at 6:30. Thank you very much. Sharath, if you have any questions, you can ask tomorrow again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.